I'm Dr. Melanie Joy. I'm a psychologist. I am the author of 3 books, Strategic Action for Animals, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, and Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improving relationships and communication for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters. I am also the president and founder of Beyond Carnism. Our organization works to expose and transform carnism, the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals. And I'm the co-founder and director of the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, and I'm also the co-founder of Pro-Veg International. I think my journey of becoming vegan started when I was very young, about 4 years old. My father is a professional fisherman. At the time, he wasn't professional yet. But he became professional shortly thereafter. And anyway, I grew up spending a lot of time on my father's boat. And when I was about 4 years old, I caught my first fish, and my parents were very excited, and they were cheering for me and helping me reel it in. And I did not share their excitement. And at the time, I was too young to really understand why and what was happening to me. I do remember that experience. I remember looking at the fish dying and feeling very bad. And from that day on, I stopped being able to eat fish, and it had been my favorite food. I would actually get sick and throw up when I was exposed to it, and I stopped being able to go on my father's boat. I would get emotional and cry until he threw all the fish back in that he had caught. Now, looking back, as a psychologist today, I could understand that I was disturbed at what I was seeing. I felt guilty and ashamed, and that I had killed an animal in that way. And so I think that actually sensitized me. It was the first, I guess, group of animal products that I stopped eating was fish and other sea life at 4 years old. I never ate anything from the ocean again. So. It wasn't until I was 23 in 1989 that I actually stopped eating other animal products and really became a vegetarian and then a vegan. I got sick from eating a hamburger that had been contaminated with a bacteria. I wound up hospitalized, and I became a vegetarian by accident because I was just disgusted at the idea of eating meat. It was like the last thing I had eaten, and I just didn't want to touch it again. So it wasn't really an ethical decision for me at the time. And I was learning about vegetarianism and how to cook vegetarian, and I, of course, stumbled upon information about animal agriculture, and I became shocked and horrified at what I had learned. And then I was shocked again when nobody I talked to was willing to hear what I had to say. The response was always like, "Don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal." And this eventually led me to a fairly long process of education. I had a master's degree in teaching and curriculum development, and I ended up becoming a psychologist. I did my PhD thesis on the psychology of eating meat. And when I really was able to understand the psychological basis for why good people turn away from atrocities, which is largely what enables atrocities to happen, I felt very compelled to do everything that I could to raise awareness about this issue. I really believed, and I believe today, that psychology illuminating these invisible mechanisms, psychological mechanisms that make it possible for people who care about animals to nevertheless harm animals. And this is not actually just about animals, that make it possible for people to participate in systems that are violent, racism, patriarchy, other isms as well. That illuminating these psychological defense mechanisms that we all inherit from our societies is critical to helping shift consciousness to create a more compassionate and just world for all animals, humans included. I decided to focus my time and energy on working with other activists because I was really, my first book is on strategy, and I've always been very interested in and committed to learning about how to most quickly and effectively empower the movement, bring about change, positive change. And so, I really believe that influencing the influencers will bring about exponential change compared to me just, reaching out to one person at a time. The activists in the vegan movement, they are the people on the front lines of the movement. This is largely the engine of the movement, at least in many ways. And so if the movement is only as effective as the activists who make it up are. And so if each activist becomes twice as effective, for example, the movement becomes twice as effective or twice as powerful. So I feel that it's a really good use of my time to help support the people who are already doing this important work, so that they can do it even more effectively than they already are, and to do it for the long haul. A lot of activists burn out and quit the movement, and I think that's also a big problem for the movement. The value I try to bring to the movement is from just a combination of my education and training. I'm an educator by training first and foremost, and then I'm also a psychologist, and I've specialized in the psychology of violence and nonviolence, and specifically the psychology of the human-animal relationship. And I'm also a relationship coach, a long-time relationship coach. And I've worked with a number of people in relationships, which is why I eventually wrote my new book, Beyond Beliefs. And so I do have training in educating others, and also in the psychology of social transformation, I guess you could say, and about 20 years of personal experience working in the movement. And I've traveled around quite extensively. I've been to 40 countries now, where I have been talking about carnism and working with vegans and hearing the stories of thousands and thousands of activists, and meeting with people in positions of leadership in the vegan movement. So what I've really tried to do is to bring all of this experience and training together to create what we do through CEVA, the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, and also through my writing, to create a framework and workshops and support materials for vegans, many of whom are doing great work, just to help them do what they're already doing as effectively as possible, and to take care of themselves in the process so they can have more sustainable lives as activists and as people. If I had to choose 3 sort of top recommendations to share with vegans, I would say number 1 is to learn effective communication, the principles and tools for effective communication. Learning effective communication it's not simply learning about how to string words together, it's learning a way of life. It's learning to have an attitude that helps you to be open to other ideas, and to be open to your own ideas in many ways, just open-minded, and to communicate your ideas in a way that increases the chances that they'll be heard the way you intend them to be. So I would suggest learning effective communication. In my book, Beyond Beliefs, I have a chapter specifically on what I see as the key principles and tools of effective communication when people are talking about veganism. But these principles apply beyond veganism too. Within that, to avoid shaming others. I think that's probably the most critical thing we can do with our communications, and that begins with our own attitudes. When we shame others, when we look at others as being less than or less worthy than, we violate their dignity, we harm their dignity essentially, and we create a disconnect between ourselves and others, and we increase the chances that that other person is going to react defensively to whatever we're talking about, to whatever we have to say. Shamed people are not people who typically feel like they're in a position to be proactive and take positive steps toward change in their own lives or in the world. Shamed people typically wrap themselves in the emotional armor necessary to protect themselves from further shaming. They tend to withdraw or attack in self-defense. So I think if all vegans could commit to this one piece of effective communication, which is to not perceive others, other non-vegans and other vegans, as somehow less than, as inferior, we would bring about transformation within our own lives and just in our interactions with others. So I guess the first suggestion I would make is to commit to not having an attitude or behaviors that shame others, that frame others as somehow less than or less worthy than. The second suggestion I would make is to commit to making impact a priority, a top priority, as long as it's not violating, your own or others' integrity. As vegans, we understandably feel really passionate about veganism, about the cause. I mean, we're well aware that there's an incredible urgency to what we do. We know that animals are suffering and dying by the billions and billions every year. And so we really need to get our message out there as effectively and quickly as possible. At the same time, the sense of urgency can cause us to fail to think about our actions, our impact. It can cause us to just be reactive and do what feels good, rather than what is actually going to be the most effective thing that we can do for animals. So I would recommend, whenever you're undertaking a new action or communicating with somebody, to just pause and say, what is the impact of this? What kinds of campaigns can our organization wage that will have the greatest impact, that will impact the greatest number of animals, for example, in a positive way? And I think when we commit to prioritizing impact and thinking more strategically, we'll increase the impact of the movement as a whole. The third recommendation I would make is to recognize that veganism is one of many isms, that all are to think of isms or oppressive systems such as carnism as spokes on a wheel. The hub of that wheel is a certain mentality, and it's the same mentality that enables people to carry out harm to animals, enables people to carry out harm to other humans. And I think it's really critical that we vegans develop an analysis of social systems and social dynamics beyond veganism. That we really, for those of us who are like white identified people, that we become aware of what that means, that we recognize our white privilege and the blind spots that come with that. That we look at systems such as patriarchy and the male privilege that it breeds and ableism as all interconnected, so that we as vegans do not end up reinforcing other oppressive systems when we don't even realize what we're doing, which happens. When we use, for example, images of objectified women in order to sell veganism, what we're doing is we're reinforcing another ism that's based on the very same mentality in many ways as the ism that causes people to disconnect from their natural empathy toward animals and objectify animals. So I think it's really critical that vegans broaden their analysis outside of just veganism, so that we can work with other groups and other movements which will help us to become greater than the sum of our parts.